It's at Bridgewater College, and thoughts and prayers are with their families, loved ones, and Bridgewater campus today. Let's all take a moment of silence in remembrance. Thank you. Today we will be hearing from Director Shannon Dion of the Department of Criminal Justice Services on their proposed budget. She will also be providing an update on several of their grant programs, including gang violence prevention and body-worn cameras. The introduced budget includes $24.7 million in general funds over the biennium for a new center for firearm violence intervention and prevention at the Department of Criminal Justice Services. The proposal includes research and training on best practices, funding and model policies for law enforcement on armed removal and other high-risk situations, and grants for community organizations, hospital, and suicide prevention. The department is currently administering grant programs for community-based gun violence prevention. So we look forward to hearing about what the center would look like should funding be appropriated, as well as an overview of the varying approaches to gun violence prevention based on the department's experience administering its current grants. After Director Dion presents, staff will provide an overview of the introduced budget and a brief review of Senator's proposed budget amendments. I would like to also remind the public that the Senate is live streaming all meetings, including this one, and today's agenda and materials are available on the committee's website. We would also like to ask everyone speaking today to use their microphone so that those viewing from elsewhere can hear. Before I turn the presentation over to Director Dion from the Department of Criminal Justice Services, I will ask staff to call the roll.
Senator Lucas.
Here.
Senator Norman. Senator Ruff.
Here.
Senator Edwards.
Here.
Senator Peterson.
Here.
Senator Marsden.
Here.
Senator Evan.
Thank you. Good morning, Director Dion. Welcome. You may begin your presentation now. And we got the memo.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning to you.
Members of the committee, my name is Shannon Dion. I'm the Director of the Department of Criminal Justice Services, and it's my pleasure to be here today to talk about a few budget items. I'm going to go over an overview of the outgoing administration's budget priorities, as well as update you on several of our grant funding streams. So the first budget item I wanted to discuss with you is our support of the Regional Criminal Justice Training Academies. DCJS is asking for an additional $526,000, which is the difference between the revenue received during FY19 and FY21. By way of background, there are 11 regional training academies that train more than 50% of Virginia's law enforcement officers. Academies are generally funded with state general funds, member contributions, and revenue from a special fund called the Regional Criminal Justice Training Academy Fund, and that fund is supported by fees and fines. Each year, academies are awarded a percentage of the previous fiscal year's revenues based on their membership population. And as you can see from the chart, that the revenues in the special fund have been declining, and we believe the pandemic exacerbated those that funding stream. It is also possible that the decrease in the revenue is compounded by the results of recent changes in criminal laws. For example, driving with suspended driver's license and decriminalization of marijuana. We've not had an opportunity yet to analyze the potential causes of the decline in the special fund revenue. So at this time, it's unknown if that revenue stream will bounce back up to the pre-pandemic levels. And so we believe that by providing more funding in the general fund rather than the special fund, it ensures that regional training academies have the support that they need to train our officers and lessens their dependence on court fees and fines to fund law enforcement training. The next item I'd like to discuss is the human trafficking response. This budget proposal is requesting 2 full-time positions, as well as $136,000 annually to be able to meet the current demand for human trafficking, technical assistance, and trainings to the field. If you'll recall, in 2019, the Crime Commission embarked on a study as a bipartisan effort to establish the State Trafficking Response Coordinator position at DCJS. And that position and our responsibilities are outlined in 9.1-116.5 and includes a laundry list of requirements that we are to do. At the time, it was estimated that fulfilling those responsibilities could be fulfilled with one full-time position of $145,000. That amount has proven insufficient to support the demand for training and technical assistance throughout the Commonwealth. At that time, the demands and the costs were unknown. So now, a few years later, we have found that through a federal funding stream, which will soon be eliminated, that we need additional staff and resources. We have lots of training that we push out, but the demand exceeds what we're able to fulfill at this point with one person. So the two positions would help case managers and clinicians, as well as providing technical assistance and outreach to community groups that are supporting human trafficking victims. Next item is supporting pre-release and post-incarceration services. We call it the PAPAS program. This request was submitted to the prior administration on behalf of the PAPAS Coalition. There are 9 PAPAS programs that serve 96 of the localities in Virginia. And PAPAS programs provide pre-release and post-incarceration services that increase the opportunity for successful reintegration of adults when they are released from jails and regional facilities into local communities. PAPAS programs provide research-informed recidivism reduction services, including assessing clients for risks or needs related to their recidivism. They provide cognitive behavioral programming and job readiness and employment services. And so this request is an additional $1 million to that program.
Senator Norman?
I don't have the exact numbers right, but as the door was hitting...
Is your mic on? I think the public wants to hear you.
Well, maybe not. My numbers are a little off, but as the previous governor was having the door hit him in the butt on the way out, he pardoned about 700 people, according to the media. And then I think sometime this next year, there's scheduled to be about 4,000 incarcerated felons who will be released. My question is this, that in order for those individuals to be released, I think there has to be a community placement plan. They have to have somewhere to go. And is that contemplated in the budget request? Because these people, while there may be a difference of opinion about them being released, that decision has been made, but they cannot be released unless there's a placement plan. And are there enough resources here to meet that tsunami of individuals that are going to be released?
Madam Chair, Senator Norman, members of the committee.
Yes.
This money goes to programs that are supporting local reentry efforts for local jails. And
I understand that, but I'm more concerned about the global issue.
Well, I think that these types of programs do help people get placed and reintegrate into society by providing support in all of those basic needs.
Madam Chairman,
Senator Norman?
do you understand that these people who are incarcerated cannot be released unless there is a placement plan?
Madam Chair, Senator Norman,
Director Dion?
this funding is for individuals coming out of local jails, not state correctional facilities.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the answer, Director Dion.
Thank you. Right. The next slide talks about supporting the Virginia Law Enforcement Accreditation Program. If you don't know, DCJS is mandated to support the Virginia Law Enforcement Professional Standards Commission. We have referred to it as VLEPSI, and this is the body that sets the Virginia accreditation standards for law enforcement agencies. We also support the Virginia Law Enforcement Accreditation Coalition, which is an organization of accreditation managers, assessors, and other professionals involved in the accreditation process. DCJS currently has one position that provides supports to the commission and helps schedule assessments for agencies, securing volunteer assessors to conduct assessments, and presenting accreditation technical assistance. This person deals with all of the paperwork and documentations, interpreting all of the standards for agencies and for assessors, and maintaining several of the processes and policies and procedures that are necessary for agencies who voluntarily want to become accredited through this program. We believe an additional staff person is necessary in order for our ability to support the field. We usually hover around 100 agencies that have accreditation status. Right now, we currently have 103 accredited agencies in the Commonwealth, and there are an additional 26 agencies seeking accreditation. And with an additional full-time person, we can allow for more hands-on, personalized technical assistance, especially for the smaller agencies that don't always have the manpower to achieve the accreditation standards on their own.
Madam Chair?
Senator Marsden?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do these positions, do they organize and explain the process to the volunteers who go in to help with the accreditation? I assume they're people from other law enforcement agencies, so their job is to organize those folks, tell them how the process works, and make sure they're doing it the right way. Is that how this is done?
Madam Chair, Senator Marsden, yes, that is correct. Our staff helps train the assessors, people who want to become volunteer assessors, and then helps the assessors understand what those standards are. And as they go into the field and do mock assessments and real assessments, they're there providing technical assistance.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome. Director Dion?
Thank you. The next slide talks about the implementation of the Marcus Alert System, and DCJS is requesting $1.5 million in ARPA funding for FY23 and in general funds for FY24. And this would help support our responsibilities under the Marcus Alert System. We currently have one Marcus Alert coordinator, which was hired this year, and we're seeking 2 additional full-time positions. One position would be for the Emergency Communications Coordinator, because with the implementation of the Marcus Alert system, we realized that there was a need for dispatchers to have additional training and support to understand what that system.
Senator Norman?
Madam Chairman, I realize that there's no historical basis or data collection that you can rely upon, but as you are planning, particularly with the number of FTE positions, what are you anticipating as those individuals being able to manage the number of calls that are coming in?
Secretary Dion?
Madam Chair, Senator Norman, this position that I speak of, the Emergency Communications Coordinator, would not actually be taking all the calls. It would be providing training to all of the dispatchers that now would be receiving those calls.
Try again. You and I are talking past each other, and I apologize because I am very obtuse. Based upon the current staffing levels, including these positions that are going to be training, what do you anticipate that the capacity will be to absorb calls? Numbers.
Madam Chair, Senator Norman, I apologize. I don't have current data on the number of dispatchers that are currently available, and I'm certainly happy to get that information for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Dion.
The other position that we're asking for would help with the crisis intervention team coordination with all of the trainings that law enforcement officers will need to go through. We need assistance to make sure that that training is delivered appropriately. The rest of the money would be used for actual implementation of the CIT training. It would help fund law enforcement officers to attend. It would be tuition assistance for law enforcement agencies to send their officers to the training. We would offer regional instructor, provide regional general instructor classes, peer support specialists and their training, and a number of training resources for the law enforcement field.
Mm-hmm.
The next slide talks about 2 positions in our finance department for the agency. We're asking for 2, specifically a senior accountant and a budget analyst, which would help DCJS better maintain our fiscal responsibilities while supporting our programmatic functions. From FY 2018 to FY 2022, the department has experienced a more than 35% increase in general funds and federal fundings. The total appropriation in FY 2018 was $272 million, and it's increased to $368 million in FY '22. This increase is a result of additional public safety grants awarded and monitored by the department, as well as additional programmatic mandates. And so we just, quite frankly, feel like we need more bodies to make sure that we are managing the money appropriately. 2 years ago, DCJS asked, we told our administration that we needed 4 additional finance positions. So we received 2 previously, and this would be the second 2. If you compare our finance section with other sister agencies, we have a total of 13 employees in our finance section. 2 of them don't deal with the finances or the grants. If you look at FY '20 staffing levels at VSP, for example, they have 21 total employees. VDM has 17 in FY '20, and DJJ had 19. So we're trying to play catch up.
Senator Norman.
On your slide 9, under the second major bullet, and I really don't know, what are victims of criminal critical incident? I understand a mass casualty event, but what is a criminal critical incident?
Yes, Madam Chair, Senator Norman, on slide 9, that is, DCJS is statutorily mandated to provide criminal critical incidents. So, for example, what happened in Virginia Beach, potentially what happened, obviously, in Bridgewater College yesterday.
Yes.
We're responsible for coordinating the state's response to state events. It's basically a criminal activity where there are mass casualties.
Chairman, I'm just trying to understand, and what happened in Bridgewater is horrendous, but I understand a mass casualty event, particularly as it, Virginia Beach is probably the most egregious example. I just didn't understand the difference between that and a criminal critical incident.
Madam Chair.
Secretary Dion.
If there are no questions about our finance position, I can go on to slide 9 and talk about the other bullets.
Yes, ma'am. I think Senator Norman was one page ahead of us.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I'm a fast reader.
I know.
We are asking for non-general funded MEL increase. After the pandemic hit in 2020, we received federal funding. It was about $10 million from the federal government for the coronavirus emergency supplemental funding. We asked for 1 position, and we're finding that we need 2 with the number of grants that have gone out to localities. So we're asking for another position for that. We're asking for 2 positions to help with our crisis response, as well as grant outreach coordinators. The next slide is just a summary of what I've discussed and the amounts and FTEs. And now I'll go on to give you an update on some of our grant programs, the first one being the Gun Violence Intervention and Prevention Grant Program. So in June of 2021, the Criminal Justice Services Board awarded grants totaling almost $2.5 million to the localities that you see there on the slide to implement gun violence intervention and prevention programs. Leading up to this award, DCJS engaged in a deliberative planning process on how to distribute these funds. We had a 3-person team that had representatives from our law enforcement division, our juvenile justice and child welfare section, as well as our grants unit. They met with national gun violence reduction experts and advocates to understand what works in other states and how gun violence intervention and prevention efforts could work in Virginia. We also relied on our DCJS Research Center to provide an analysis of crime data to inform the grant solicitation process. So in order to target these limited funds, we established funding criteria focused on localities that are disproportionately impacted by gun violence, demonstrated by either 20 or more homicides for calendar year 2019, 10 or more homicides, and a homicide rate of at least 50% higher than the statewide average for calendar year 2019, or if they had a unique and compelling need for additional resources.
Madam Chair,
Senator Peterson?
I guess I just have to ask,
Senator Peterson?
why did you all name this measure gun? Why couldn't you just say violence prevention? It's almost like you wanted the House of Delegates to take it out. I mean, why couldn't you just said, violence prevention?
Madam Chair, Senator Chapman.
Because I think there's it's Peterson, but I think there's some good things in here, but it's almost as like it was named in a way to sort of put a target on it.
Madam Chair, I believe we received the name as it came to us.
Oh, okay, I guess you had no agency, okay.
Senator Norman?
I know you had nothing to do with this. It's just curious to me as I look down these grants. All of them seem to focus on ceasefire or some intervention program on guns, except Richmond, which had the highest murder rate that they've had in years, and they're focusing on intervention in schools. Is that because you may not know, do they have alternative funding that's focusing on the gun violence, particularly amongst the various gangs that are in the city of Richmond?
Madam Chair, Senator Norman,
Secretary Dion?
I apologize. I don't know if they have additional resources for that.
Thank you.
We worked very closely with the localities and let them help determine what the need was in their locality. All right, so the next slide is called the Community-Based Gun Violence Intervention Grant Program. We've received an additional $2.5 million in ARPA funding to support community-based gun violence reduction or youth and gang violence intervention programming. This funding prioritized localities that were experiencing higher than average levels of gun violence, and those assessed pursuant to the budget language, which included Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, Richmond, Roanoke, Petersburg, and Portsmouth. And under this solicitation, eligible applicants include local government agencies such as law enforcement, criminal justice, and human services agencies, and nonprofit organizations providing human services and criminal justice services. This grant solicitation is currently open, and applicants can apply for funding under one of the three categories. Local government agencies can apply for up to $350,000. Non-government agencies can apply for up to $350,000, and there will be about $120,000 available for smaller community-based organizations to receive micro grants. So that solicitation is open. We have webinars in February, and we expect the Criminal Justice Services Board to make their award in June of this year.
Can't be any too soon.
I'm sorry.
No, I guess I was just mouthing out loud what I was thinking. I said, can't come any too soon.
Oh. All right, the next slide, Madam Chair, is the Youth and Gang Violence Prevention Community Assessments. So out of the 2020 Appropriations Act, DCJS received $25,000 for 5 localities. Unfortunately, this went to Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, Richmond, Roanoke, and Petersburg. It did go out in March of this year. It was a delay. We had a couple of things going on. We had COVID, and our manpower to push this out was definitely strained. As I mentioned, we received the coronavirus supplemental funding, so that we prioritized that to push that out, and then the local abilities to receive and get ready to take this money to do the assessments. But the assessments are underway.
Madam Chair?
Senator Marsden?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had the opportunity a few years back to serve as the Technical Assistance Director for the Justice Department's Youth Violence Prevention Forum. We worked with 10 cities around the country, and I thought it was the best federal project I had worked on. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Virginia did not have one of the 10 cities. It was Boston, Chicago, Detroit, Memphis, all the usual suspects. And the idea was we gave them very, very little money, just enough to help with planning. But the object was to bring all of your agencies together, all of your private nonprofits and community interest groups together to create a plan that dealt with, prevention, intervention, enforcement, and parole. And it was a very good model. If you're interested, give me a shout, and I can hook you up with some of the things. But some of the cities came up with really, really good ideas in how to do that. Boston being the poster child for figuring out youth gun violence the best. They put probation officers in cars at night rather than just sitting in your desk during the daytime, and got them out there to see where their clients were and what they were doing, and they had some dramatic results. Chicago couldn't figure anything out. Minnesota, Minneapolis did some really interesting things, but if you're interested, give me a shout and I'll fill you in. Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. I'll certainly be following up with the senator. Appreciate that.
I'm thinking out loud too much here this morning.
Better stop sitting next to me.
All right, I'm going to...
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn now to the body-worn camera grant program. During the 2020 special session, $6.4 million was made available to DCJS to make one-time grants to law enforcement agencies for the purchase, operation, and maintenance of body-worn cameras. We issued 2 rounds of solicitations, and we awarded 59 awards. That was broken down to 43 police departments, 15 sheriff's offices. It included 12 cities, 18 counties, 24 towns, 3 institutions of higher learning, and 2 airport authorities. Some of the challenges...
Senator Norman?
What is that, the grant money, what is it used for?
Madam Chair, Senator Norman, it is used for the purchase of camera systems, data storage, technology costs, and other one-time costs associated with agencies having and deploying body-worn cameras.
Thank you. Madam Chair?
Senator Edwards?
How many law enforcement agencies have body-worn cameras? Do all of them, or?
Madam Chair, I do not know the answer to that.
Is it required? Do we require by law, or is it something they're doing?
Madam Chair, it's my understanding that it's not required by law.
Okay. But it's more and more standard, is that right?
Madam Chair, I think it depends on the locality and what they determine is necessary for their...
Senator Norman?
It is not required by law. What it is locality-based, but what the localities are doing is more and more emphasis that if you have them, they need to be activated. And the collateral issue with it is, which is way outside of Madam Secretary's world, is as we made these additional grants and more localities get into it, that there's greater pressure on the Commonwealth Attorney's Office because they have to review them. And we've backfilled them maybe 2 years ago, but as we make more grants, it's more demand.
Oh, no, I thought you wanted to speak. What's that? I thought you wanted to speak. No. Sorry, Secretary Dion.
Madam Chair, I have heard similar situations that I believe for every 75 body-worn cameras, there needs to be an extra prosecutor hired to review the footage, and that anecdotally is one of the challenges that we've heard. In addition, the grant language, the appropriations language requires a 50% match. So some agencies have struggled with that because of the strain on their budgets due to the pandemic. We also have heard that there may be some supply chain issues as well. $5 million of the 6.4 was reappropriated, and we are going to be issuing a 3rd round, and hopefully we'll have additional applications for that. We're going to increase the maximum amount that agencies can apply for. We are trying to get this funding put into the body-worn camera fund that was established during the 2021 session, because in that fund, if there is money in that fund, there's no match required, and that may assist localities.
Okay.
And I believe that concludes my presentation for you this morning.
Senator Ruff?
If you could return back to 11 and 12 and 13, I commend y'all on the effort you're making in those 6 cities. But I don't see Danville or Hopewell listed anywhere, and both of them have murder rates that are per capita higher than some of those. Are y'all reaching out to them?
Senator Ruff, did you say Dan? I didn't hear you. Is your mic on?
It's on.
Okay, okay, Danville and Hopewell, okay. Secretary Dion?
Madam Chair, Senator Ruff, we are working with, I know definitely we're working with Danville on other community-based projects. I'm not sure about Hopewell, but I think that the way that the language was written, we, and the criteria that we established to make sure that there was, that we're hitting the localities that were experiencing disproportionate rates of gun violence. And I can certainly get that.
I would
list
ask you
here.
to look at those two cities
Yes.
particularly.
Senator Ruff? Secretary Dion? Did you say that concludes your presentation?
Yes, ma'am, that does.
Any further questions of Secretary Dion by any member of the committee? Well, seeing none, I just want to thank you for coming and thank you for the information. It's very enlightening.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
members.
Okay, now I think we're going to get a presentation from our staff. Good morning again, and thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. So we'll start with a brief overview of the governor's budget. We've obviously heard some of these in some of the agencies that have been coming before us. But turning first to the caboose, so for FY 29, or sorry, for SB 29, the biggest item here is $6.8 million in general fund for the Department of Corrections for inmate health care. I'll get into that a little more on a future slide, but we heard about that in Director Clark's presentation.
Sure.
There's also a small item, $43,000 general funds for the Department of Fire Programs to fully fund a contract for the fire marshal, and then a couple other non-general fund items. Turning to the next slide, this is just an overview of public safety and homeland security budget. So we're seeing in general fund an $178.5 million increase in FY23 and $186.3 million in FY24. The largest items that contribute to that increase are the compensation actions that we heard about at Department of Corrections and Virginia State Police, so $85.2 million across the biennium at DOC and $48.4 million at the Virginia State Police. Second largest item is $33.6 million general fund for the operating costs for the new Cannabis Control Authority. We'll talk about that a little more later. And then the $27.4 million general fund for the proposed Virginia Center for Firearm Violence Intervention and Prevention that was in Governor Northam's outgoing budget at DCJS. So moving to the next slide for Department of Corrections, we talked a lot about the compensation for security staff. So, just really quickly, that's the increase for correctional officers of about 25%, and for the rest of supervisory security staff of 20%. And then there's adjustments to address compression, so for basically length of service. Moving to inmate health care, so we heard about this from Director Clark. Right now, the department has about 10 to 13 facilities that are privately contracted out for their health care. The department in March did an internal working group and just looked at other states. It's kind of split as to who does it in-house or who has a contractor for the medical services, and they decided to go in-house. Happy to provide more information on that further. I think that the general logic that they're presenting is that they now have the capacity to do it where they didn't before. They're projecting either modest savings or no change in cost versus no basically cost attributed to the transition, but happy to provide more details on that in the future or in this. Moving on to mental health and cognitive counselors. So you'll see kind of a theme across the department that there are a lot of new positions. So this is 73 total positions. They're divided about in half. 23 are for psychologist associates to improve the caseload, have a better ratio, and secure facilities. And then about half are for cognitive counselors. This is taking a pilot that was done in about 5 probation and parole districts and taking it statewide to have more counseling associated with those on probation.
Okay.
So for earned sentence credit implementation, this kind of gets to Senator Norman's question of Director Dion. I have heard the number of 4,000 that we think could be leaving due to earned sentence credit implementation. I have been able to verify those numbers. Looking back at a fiscal impact statement, it looks like the amount assumed in the introduced budget was about 1,500 inmates that'll leave in the first year, with about a quarter of them leaving in that first month at the beginning of the year, and then about, it's more than 9,000 that will be leaving kind of, across several years. So I think those figures are probably in flux. There's a report that's due from the Department of Corrections this December that should flesh that out a little better. What exactly is the timing of folks leaving? But that was the number assumed in the introduced budget.
Senator Norman.
I'll preface it by saying I'm going to make a little bit of a political statement. In the progressive rush to judgment to modify some of these laws that have happened in the last 2 years, no accurate pro forma takeoff was done on finances on this. The rush to judgment was, we need to give this earned in credit, we need to let people out earlier, but they really had not projected out what the cost was going to be. And I understand justice reform against dollars maybe don't compute, but it's starting to come home now.
Madam Chair, Senator Norman, that's helpful Yes, no, helpful commentary. The only other thing I'll kind of say on that is that I know when we first adopted our incentive credit implementation, there was a slight, obviously there's state responsible individuals who are in local jails. So there was a small decrease in cost, I think 2.6 million that was assumed on the comp board side of things for folks moving out. We are kind of looking at what all that shifting means for the cost of earned sentence credit implementation a little bit further as we develop the budget. The only other thing that I was able to find kind of on that is with the offender forecast that the Secretary of Public Safety put out in the fall, there are a lot of unknowns. So they ended up predicting it flat because of all the uncertainties. There's kind of COVID in the mix. There's all the criminal justice reforms. There's kind of, are judges going to adjust their sentencing as a result of earned sentence credit implementation? So just kind of as further context, that offender forecast they ended up saying was flat just because of all these different things that are moving and that are in flux. Moving on to community residential program. As you all know, that's just short-term housing when folks leave incarceration. This is to, the contract was up for renewal after 5 years. This is to fully fund that or to adjust with the increase. These sex offender caseloads is for 47 probation and parole officers to handle. As you can imagine, these are kind of more intense cases. There's a recommended ratio of 1 to 40 as compared to a little bit higher of a ratio for non-sex offenders. So this is kind of keeping up with those increases in past years and the number of people they're seeing on the sex offender and crimes against minors registry. Moving along, again, these are a lot of positions, IT positions. Director Clark spoke to career and technical education. He spoke to, this is 7 positions that would be either mobile or in areas that don't currently have career and technical education programming, HVAC, things like that. Capital project managers is to help handle, they received a capital improvement fund of $15 million. I believe they're trying to increase it in the budget to $20 million this year. So this is to make sure the administration of that's effective. HR Health and Safety is focused on employee wellness. Medicaid enrollment, they currently have folks that are primarily focused on inpatient hospitalization. So as you know, inmates can receive Medicaid reimbursement only if they have inpatient hospitalization while they're incarcerated. So they have folks focused on that, but this is to expand their focus in central office to enrolling people who are going to be released into the community, including at probation officers and local jails. There's a couple Woodrum amendments here for bills that are coming through, both of them related to marijuana. And then and one COVID-19 position. This is a continuation of ARPA funds, COVID-19 project managers. I'll pause there to see if there's any questions before I go to the next slide.
Questions for staff? Senator Edwards?
I have a question. Going back to human trafficking, are the caseload of human trafficking increasing, stagnant, or what?
I'll have to look. So what I spoke to on this slide was an increase in sex offender caseloads. That's increased, I think it's 16% since 2018. For human trafficking, I'll have to look. I know the Department of Criminal Justice Services was presenting that that's a new coordination program that they're doing as of the past couple years. I'll have to ask them kind of, is that because we're seeing more victims?
Thank you.
Moving to the next slide. 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 Moving to So I'll come back to Virginia Center for Firearm Violence Intervention and Prevention on the next slide. I think I'll also just kind of go through this. Shannon just went through this, so I won't harp on it. They did, one thing I don't think she highlighted was the Big Heroes of Minorities in Every Society program. The General Assembly provided $500,000 general fund for them last year. The outgoing budget has $1.5 million for them in general funds in this upcoming fiscal year. And this is really, it's focused on gun violence prevention, but it's also a broader mission. They focus on community enrichment, building positive relationships, extracurricular, community services, sports activities. So that's kind of the main other item I'll highlight on the DCJS slide. Moving on to the next slide, the Virginia Center for Firearm Violence Intervention and Prevention. So this was in Governor Northam's outgoing budget. You can kind of see here a breakdown of what this center would be. And I think the high-level takeaway is that it's focused on data collection, developing and sharing best practices, kind of capacity building at the local level. And then it also has these three kind of buckets of grant funding. So one is community-based gun violence prevention intervention grant program. That would be probably similar to what the department just presented on that they're administering, but it could also go to hospitals to kind of intervene when folks are there. There's also $2.5 million general fund in each year for firearm suicide prevention grant program, and then $2.5 million in each year for a firearm removal grant program. This could be focused on
Madam Chair.
Senator Peterson?
Yeah, so you have $2.5 million for firearm suicide prevention, which I assume would be securing weapons but what about people that commit suicide by taking overdose or jumping off a building or things like that? Is there any concern for that, or?
Madam Chair, Senator Peterson, so kind of to your point, I think it goes back to kind of the group, the violence intervention versus specific to firearm violence.
Right.
This would be specific to firearm violence. There is, and we'll kind of get into this into the proposed amendments, Governor Youngkin has a budget amendment that would be, I believe, $5 million over the 2 years that is that group violence focus as opposed to this firearm violence specifically.
Well, follow-up question, Madam
Senator
Chair.
Peterson?
Yeah, here's my question. That is, this is the Public Safety Subcommittee, and I don't know, maybe you consider a firearm suicide to be a violation of public safety. If someone commits suicide by taking, say, an overdose, maybe that's not public safety. Maybe that's mental health. I don't know. Maybe that's the answer. But to me, I don't think anyone's less dead than the other. So I just feel like everything's firearm, but that's not necessarily how kids choose to end their lives. So,
Madam Chair, Senator Peterson.
Okay. Senator Norman, did you have a question also, Senator Edwards? Senator Norman first. Okay.
Senator Ruff, who's a quicker reader than I am, pointed out to me firearm removal grant. What is that?
So I think one example of that would be, I'll give two. So I think one would be kind of training it's training for law enforcement officers is the short answer. To basically, if they're having to execute a substantial risk order or some kind of high-risk situation, maybe it's a domestic violence situation, maybe it's an active shooter situation, my understanding from the conversations is that it would train them on how to do that more safely.
That'd be like under an emergency or a protective order, you've got to surrender your firearm. I'm sorry?
I said, I was thinking red flag, I don't know.
No, but under emergency or protective orders, they have to remove the firearms, and they rely upon the person who has the protective order against to voluntarily surrender it. If they don't, then law enforcement gets involved with it. Would it be that type of thing?
That does sound like what it is to me. Thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'll pause there. Are there any other questions on the Center for Firearm Violence Intervention and Prevention?
I don't know if he does.
I've got a question.
Yeah, Senator Edwards, I thought you did.
Yeah, you do have a firearm violence prevention intervention grant program and also firearm suicide prevention grant program. They're obviously very related. What's the distinction? Can you make a distinction? The suicide prevention, I guess, is more a mental health issue or what?
That,
I was thinking that one more was red flag, but I don't know.
I think the red flag one is more like the firearm removal grant program, whereas firearm suicide prevention would, for example, I think there are certain populations that are, if they're at risk for suicide, would be more likely to commit it using a firearm. So this could be things like, someone mentioned safe storage of guns, things like that, so that if I'm at risk of suicide and I have access to a firearm, this would be kind of how to see that risk and how to respond to it. I can also, I'm obviously not an expert on firearm violence intervention prevention, so I can get follow-up for you all as well, because that's a good question.
That'd be helpful, thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next slide. So for Virginia State Police, again, the compensation increases for sworn officers. This is a 7% increase in the salary, as well as some adjustments for compression. Colonel Settle also presented on their case and records management system. So this is distinct from Project CRIS, their criminal records and information system. This more deals with computer-aided dispatch, so someone responding to an incident at the scene, or their records management system, what you more think of as police reports, or what they're using to track trends or do an investigation. This is to upgrade those legacy systems and also make them one unified platform, kind of speak to each other. We also have live scan fingerprinting machines. This is a continuation of ARPA funds. So the General Assembly provided $1.4 million during the special session. In FY22, it also allocated another $1.4 million in FY23. So that first tranche of funds is for the updating the servers. Second is for purchasing those live scan fingerprinting machines. And then this is for the operating cost, the annual operating cost. This is basically just to go off of paper fingerprinting cards. Moving to the next slide. So for Virginia Department of Emergency Management, their largest general fund ask is to convert positions from non-general fund to general fund. This is 10 positions that are currently supported by program-specific non-general funds, but they view them as core operating positions, so they'd like to move them over to ensure that they continue. Just kind of other positions going through as the VEST, Virginia Emergency Support Team Readiness. That's 4 positions to also, self-explanatory for readiness. And then VEST COVID-19 and other recovery efforts. And then they also have, under the other category, $2 million in non-general fund each year to extend, I believe it's about 14 disaster recovery positions. So those are the various positions that they're asking for across preparedness and response. Also, we have hazardous materials training space lease. That's to upgrade a modular facility they're using for training, and a vehicle replacement item. They also have a diversity, equity, inclusion position, which they talked about. That's one position, as well as a tool that they use that identifies high-risk communities. I'll pause before I continue on.
Questions, anyone? No questions right now.
All right, next slide. So going to kind of the biggest here is the Cannabis Control Authority operating budget. I'll get to that a little bit on the next slide. Other than that, we have Commonwealth Attorney Services Council, a domestic violence training position. This is half of a position. Currently, it's funded by grants. I think they're just trying to ensure that it stays by putting in general funds. We have, again, that continuation of the Department of Fire Programs contract. And then for the Department of Forensic Sciences, they've been seeing an increase in the past few years of both DUIs and DUIDs, ranging between 40 and 55%. So they also have an increased number of cases coming from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner due to increases in overdoses and other things like that. So this is to handle those increased caseloads. And then for the THC data collection, right now, they only test for the presence of THC in your system. If you have, if you're charged with a DUI or a DUID, they're only testing for THC in certain circumstances. So this is to test for THC with all blood samples that are collected in those instances. A couple items for a forensic academy trainer, and then for the parole board, a victim's assistant position. That would be, I believe, part-time. Moving to the next slide for the Cannabis Control Authority operating budget. So, as you all well know, we passed cannabis legalization last year during the General Assembly session. And this is basically as their authority gets up and running. So they scale it in with 73 positions in the first year and 116 in the second. And my understanding is basically that they worked with DHRM to get these salaries. This is a little bit higher than what was initially predicted by JLARC and what was included in the fiscal impact statement last year. It's about the same number of positions, but the cost overall is a little bit higher for a few reasons. But, just kind of highlighting a few things, the most positions that they're requesting would be in the investigations, tax, and enforcement section, moving from 21 in FY23 to 40 in FY24. And then they also have the social equity team to comply with the social equity program that's in the legislation, 13 positions in FY23 and 15 in FY24. The other thing here is the loan fund of $6 million. JLARC had recommended $12 million for a loan fund. This is taking the 6 and spreading it, or taking the 12 and spreading it across 2 years. So $6 million in FY24. These are for social equity license applicants. And I think the big thing to note here is that eventually this is something that the marijuana tax revenue would fund. First it would go to their operating budget and then to the different taxes that it's designated for. Initially, when the bill passed, the thought was that there would be between 13.8 and 23 million in FY24 already coming in from the marijuana tax revenue and maybe some fee licenses. But the thinking behind, I think, putting it in general fund in FY24, even though there may be some revenues coming in, is just to deal with the uncertainties around market volatility, things that could happen in the federal government that might change it. And so the administration decided to use full general fund with that proposal. I'll pause there for any questions, or I'll just keep on going.
Questions?
All right, sounds good. Moving to Veterans and Defense Affairs, I'll go ahead 2 slides. So we have this suicide and opiate use prevention program. As Senator Peterson noted, a theme across these. The Department of Veterans Services also asked for a number of positions. I've listed them here. The general gist is that they, so for Virginia Value and Veterans Program, that's just to expand it to more businesses. There's some central office positions that deal with IT and also coordination for suicide prevention, housing, and criminal justice services. And then there's 5 positions that would be in veteran service representative offices across the state. That's just those offices are seeing that they don't have enough to cover the area that they're trying to cover, and so they've asked for these kind of target resource specialists and veteran service representatives. Last week, you'll remember that the administration noted they have Governor Youngkin has an amendment in for $9 million each year to expand the number of offices. Currently, and I believe we expanded, y'all would know better, but I believe we expanded them under Secretary Harvey in 2018. There's now 43 veteran benefit offices and about 25 veteran and family support offices. So in this proposal, it would kind of be to provide additional staff to support that. Governor Youngkin's amendment would expand the number of those offices statewide. The only other thing I'll note on this slide is the Virginia Military Survivors and Dependents Education Program positions. This benefit was expanded in FY19 to have tuition available to individuals who have a service-related disability, but it's not necessarily combat-related. It used to have to be combat-related, so they're seeing an increase in applications. I believe Chev is predicting about 50% increase each year, so this is to do the eligibility and the outreach for that program. Moving to the next slide. The largest thing here is in the Office of the Secretary of Veterans and Defense Affairs, the State Military Community Infrastructure Program, $10 million in the first year. And so this is essentially a match for the federal Defense Community Infrastructure Program. It's to provide a local match so that communities can do stuff like improve the quality of life in the community, do improvements like roads, flood control. This would provide the local match so that they would be eligible for those DoD dollars. I'll pause here and see if the only other big thing here is the $1 million each year in tuition assistance, and there's companion legislation to change it to a reimbursement model because that program has had some carryover balances in prior years. But unless there's any questions on the rest of this, I can move on to the next slide.
We have There appear to be none right now.
Sounds good. And then this is the last slide. So we won't go through this because it's small and there's a lot. But the kind of what I'm trying to highlight here is these are all the ARPA funds that were provided to public safety and veterans affairs agencies in both the ARPA special session and then were allotted for FY23 and 24. Something that's somewhat unique to this area is that they've chosen to allocate some in general funds. So things that were initially allotted for ARPA, there's some that are continuing in general funds, I assume to build them into the base. The largest thing there is that the Virginia State Police compensation actions were initially ARPA. They're obviously putting that in the general fund to continue it forward. And then there are a few COVID-19 related coordination positions at VDEM and DOC that initially were ARPA, and they're changing to general fund in FY24. All right, that concludes my presentation.
Members of the committee, questions? Thank you so much. This was very enlightening.
Good, and you all aren't quite done with me because I'm going to do now the senator proposed amendments, but I'll make that very brief.
Okay. All right.
So turning to your binder on 3, I'll start with SB 29. So Department of Corrections, the first one here is for Senator Eben for air conditioning at DOC facilities. He highlighted this last week. There's one from Senator Newman for the Southern Virginia Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. That's a similar idea to the regional training academies where they've lost some revenue due to court fees. And then we have 3 for aid to localities with police departments from Senator Edwards, Lucas, and Reeves. You all well know what the idea is there, but that's because the 599 program by statute goes up with the general fund. That was not provided in the introduced budget, and so this is to make it match that increase.
Correct. Very good.
Moving to SB 30, so a lot of these are for bills. Some of them are placeholders of bills that may end up not needing a fiscal impact statement. So I'll just go to line 3, Virginia ABC Higher Education Substance Use Programs. That's to increase participation in that program out of Virginia ABC from Senator Favola. We have a couple amendments related to the Cannabis Control Authority from Senator Eben. One is for public health campaigns. I'll note there is some funding in HHR for that purpose, just coming out of the health agencies. And then the other one is for his bill, Senate Bill 313, which would start sales early and on kind of a limited basis with the existing companies. Here we have from Senator Edwards, DOC probation and parole staff salary increase. As we heard from Director Clark, they also have a vacancy rate about 9%. So that's to fund their increases as proposed by the work group. Another couple bills, including Senate Bill 108, Senator Morrissey's bill that was reported out of committee yesterday, use of isolated confinement. We're currently tracking about $8.1 million each year for staff to implement those provisions of that bill that reported out of committee. Senator Ruff, we have a salary increases for Lawrenceville Correctional Center, so they're treated on par with the other state-run facilities. And then I'm going to we'll skip through the Corrections Special Reserve Fund on the rest of page 1. We'll go through those next week with the staff attorney from Judiciary. Those are all the Woodrums. Moving to line 27 on page 2, Senator Morrison, Law Enforcement Cannabis Training. We also have an amendment on the next line for school resource officers. This is a companion amendment to a Governor Youngkin amendment. Essentially, the associated bill would require school resource officers in all schools. Governor Youngkin's amendment provides the state share of the 705 schools that don't currently have a school resource officer, and then Senator Steff's amendment is for the local share of that.
Madam Chair,
Senator Peterson?
what if a school doesn't want a resource officer?
Madam Chair, Senator Peterson, I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I do believe his bill would require it, but yeah.
Madam Chair?
Senator Marsden?
Thank you. School resource officers are a mixed bag. You know, it has to be the right person in the right school, the right place, right time, you know, to make that work. Some place it works beautifully. At other places, it does begin to feed the, the pipeline of
It does indeed.
schools to corrections by getting things into juvenile court that just don't belong there. We have generations after generations of high school principals who don't know how to deal with kids because they have a school resource officer there. They just shuffle, a lot of things off to. And in some places, the relationship is great and the program works great. And other places, it just does not. And, mandating it everywhere is kind of scary.
Thank you, Senator Marsden.
Moving on, I'll pause. Senator Marsden, Senator Peterson, I don't know if you want to say anything about your amendments here. Senator Marsden's the Virginia Victim Assistance Network, and Senator Peterson, the Virginia Mass Violence Care
Yes, I
Fund.
do.
Senator Marsden?
I'm
Or
sorry.
Senator Peterson?
Yeah, this is Peterson. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Mass Violence Prevention Fund was a fund set up by a constituent of mine, Joe Samaha, whose daughter Rima was one of the victims at Virginia Tech. And it's less sort of, and I got to be blunt, less sort of provocatively in your face than some of the other quote-unquote violence prevention funds. It's really to help communities adjust and to provide kind of seed money for those situations where you have people, say, in Virginia Beach that years afterwards either didn't have a life insurance policy or need some type of assistance going forward. And so the $10 million would be seed money. It would be directly impactful for Virginia Beach. I think he had talked with Senator Jen Kiggins about being a co-patron on that. I don't know if he did that, but I put that in as a marker to try and get this fund started. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peterson. Senator Marsden?
What you were talking about?
Virginia Victim Assistance Network, and also the Higher Education for Law Enforcement Officers.
Yeah, they pretty much speak for themselves with the Victim Assistance Network. They came to me looking for, some assistance and expand that. I don't have my notes with me on those. I did 32 budget amendments this year, but if you could, review them for the committee, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly. Moving forward to a Senator Deeds amendment for sexual assault forensic examiner grants. This is an associated bill that will be in committee this morning. Senator Eben Crime Reduction Mediation Pilot Program from Northern Virginia Family Services. Senator Edwards Pretrial Services and Community Corrections. This funds community alternatives, kind of a companion to PAPAS at the local level, providing additional support. We also have, moving to page 3, again for the 599 program, this is a continuation of those in SB 30.
Right.
Senator Lucas, this is to help police departments, this is called ballistic evidence, but it's to help them operate more effectively and efficiently with some machinery for ballistic evidence collection and processing. I'm kind of going to skip through some of these that are for bills. We also have Senator McCullen, grant funding for Delinquency Prevention and Youth Development Act grants. Those are in the code currently, but are not funded for youth services boards overseen by DJJ. We have below that a list of bills, mostly that deal with criminal record sealing, some of which do have a fiscal impact, some of which probably will end up not. And then from Senator Morrissey, the Virginia State Police salary increases for entry-level civilian employees. The introduced budget includes sworn, but not civilian.
One question about Governor Youngkin's on number 46. Is that the same as the 599 funds?
Yes, I believe his is limited to localities that have increased funding on their own in the past. So I believe it is the 599, but it's limited to certain police departments. I'll get
Thank
further
you.
information on that.
Madam Chair?
Senator Marsden?
Just one update, Katie. The 52, line 52, Department of Juvenile Justice, the Juvenile Records Model Memorandum of Understanding. My understanding is that they are going to be able to handle that in-house and will not need a budget amendment on that.
Great. Yeah, I wrote next to it, no fiscal impact from the FIS. So that's tracking with what I have, and thank you for the update. Moving on to page 4, we have Senator Edwards. This is Senate Bill 135 to increase Virginia Parole Board membership from 5 to 11 members. Senator Mason, next line. This is building on current funding we have for Joint Base Langley-Eustis vicinity for encroachment. Moving down, we have from Senator Kiggins, again, another Senate bill, report on fee waivers for veteran-owned businesses. Senator Vogel, Veteran Housing in Fauquier County, that provides affordable housing. Senator Morrissey, Petersburg Freedom Support Center, that's a veteran support office. And then we have some amendments from Senator Ruff and others on the Fort Lee Museum Enclave project. I believe yours is specific to women in the military. I think that is it. Thank you for your patience as I went through that, and here to answer any questions either now or I can get follow-up information.
Thank you so much. Any further questions?
Thank you all.
Everybody's saying good job, so with that, committee will rise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Katie?